Namaskar. Welcome back to all new channel Swayam Educational Foundation, a charitable initiative for educated and empowered Bharat. So today we are beginning with the grade 12th English book 1 Flamingos, chapter number 6, Poets and Pancakes. So, dear students, you need to understand that this chapter has been introduced to this syllabus this time after a long period of gap. So this is one of the probably students are feeling that this is the difficult chapter, but let me tell you, it is not that difficult. Okay, so if we talk about the name Asokamitran, who has written this, his real name is Jagadish Tyagarajan. So if you see his picture, so his real name is Jagadish Tyagarajan. Now, Asokamitran, he was born in 1931 and died in 2007. Recently, he has died. So, one of the most influential figure in post-independent Tamil literature. He wrote over 200 short stories, 8 novels, some 15 novellas, a distinguished essayist and critic, and in 1996 he received Sahitya Akademi Award for Appavin Senegidhar, a collection of short stories. So Asokamitran in 1966 he left his work in the film industry and has since said that he felt he should not continue with a system which had built in inequities. So he actually believed in equalities, but here there were inequities. That's why he did not want to continue. It was from 1966 that he became a full time writer and he took up the pseudonym of Ashoka Mitran. So this is a pen name. Always, most of the writers take a pen name and write with that name. So his style, if we talk about, so his works are characterized by simplicity and clarity of thought and drew from his professional and personal experiences. So most of the things which he is writing about his experience, which he has seen. So he has written one of the book. So his book name is My Years with Boss at the Gemini Studio, by Ashoka Mitran. So this is the book which you are seeing on your screen. So in this book, basically, we need to just summarize first. Let's try to understand about this chapter in a smaller summary. Then later on, we will do the bigger summary also. But first, we need to understand what is the summary of this chapter. So if I say about this chapter, so the lesson has been taken from the book My Years with the Boss, written by Asokamitran. And in this excerpt, he talks about the elements that kept Gemini Studio running. Here, so from Pancake makeup to the office boy of the makeup department, from Subbu to the lawyer, every element helped in making Gemini Studio a successful film producing company. So let me tell you that he is telling that this studio, Gemini Studio, was a successful film producing company. And in this, there were several departments. For example, makeup department was there where pancakes were applied on the actors. And then office boy was there in this makeup department. There was another person, Kotha Mangalam Subbu, and there was another person who was a lawyer. So all these things made together Gemini Studio a successful studio. Now what happens? In this lesson, Asokamitran talks about Gemini Studio and all that help in keeping it in the spotlight. He starts by making mention about Pancakes, the famous makeup brand, which Gemini Studio ordered in truckloads. That means in bulk there was order, because at that time pancakes were applied on every audience, even the audience who were used to be there. And here one line has been used that pancake was applied to make the people look ugly rather than make them to look beautiful. So he then talks about the plight of the actors and actresses who have to bear too many lights on their face while getting ready in the makeup room. So halogen types of lights were there, and in those lights there was too much of heat. And in even India being one of the tropical country, here heat is already there. And then in these makeup departments, and that too in Tamil Nadu, so the makeup department, according to him, used heaps of makeup to turn them into ugly looking creatures. Shockingly, he talks about the office boy of the makeup department whose task is to slap paint onto the face of the players at the time of crowd shooting. So whenever there was a crowd shooting, he will go there and he will apply that makeup, paint their faces to make them more ugly. So he was a poet. Asokamitran, he talks about now. So he was a poet and had joined the studio in the hope of becoming an actor, screenwriter, director, or a lyricist. In those days, the author used to work inside a cubicle and had the task of collecting newspaper cuttings, which, according to the other people in the Gemini studio, it was an insignificant task that he was doing nothing, just collecting, tearing the papers. So, thus, office boy would come in time again to bother him with his complaints about the people. He was well convinced that the real reason, who was well convinced? The office boy. The office boy was well convinced that the real reason behind his misery was Subbu. Now, Kotha Mangalam Subbu is one of the main lead person in this entire story where we are going. So what happens? Subbu, he thought Subbu had an advantage because he was born a Brahmin. So here caste system has also been highlighted, that how Subbu was not that much a good actor. But what happened? Because he was born in a Brahmin caste, upper caste, so he was taken to the film industry. Subbu was a, but in reality, Subbu was a resourceful man whose loyalty made him stand out. So he was very loyal to the Gemini Studio owner, Mr. Watson. So he was a tailor made for film. Now, see, Subbu was a tailor made for films, and it was difficult to imagine filmmaking without him. He was very welcoming and was known for his hospitality. That means he has given jobs to many people who came to Chennai and worked with them. Just like many others at the Gemini studio, he also did poetry, and he was a fond of writing poetry. He worked for the story department, which also consisted of a lawyer. Now, this is the story department where there used to be a lawyer. People generally called him the opposite of a legal practitioner. That means he was an illegal practitioner. He was a logical and neutral man amidst a room full of dreamers. Here, people were used to dream about becoming big and making their name and fame and everything. But he was a very logical man and he was very neutral. We will come to know what happened. So Ashoka Mitra then describes how Gemini Studio got a chance to host a group of international performers called MRA, Moral Rearmament Army. Now, this need to be discussed in detail. Later on in this chapter, we are going to discuss one by one each and everything in detail. So, though the plots and messages were not complex by the plays which Moral Rearmament Army performed here, their sets and costumes were near to perfection. So much so that for many years, Tamil plays displayed sunset and sunrise in a way inherited from Jotham Valley. So this was a play performed by Moral Rearmament Army in Gemini Studio, and the way they depicted sunset and sunrise means in every play they used to then used in what we say Gemini Studio. Then another guest came later on after Moral Rearmament Army came. another guest came, and his name was Stephen Spender. He comes to visit Gemini Studio. Now, people had hardly heard of him and they could not even connect with him due to linguistic barriers. So, when he came and gave his lecture, audience were not able to understand what he has said. Probably he has never seen such a silent audio who were listening to him trying to understand, but it was visible that they could not understand even a single thing what he said. So it was not until a few years later that Asokamitran saw his name in a book and realized who he really or actually was. So this is the main summary or a short summary we can say, in which I have tried to summarize. Later on, we are going to do it in a larger scale. So yes, now if he says that my years with boss, he wrote about his experience working in film industry in a set of columns for Illustrated Weekly of India. These columns later became his book, My Years with Boss. It is referred to the S.S. Vasan. So S.S. Vasan is the boss or the owner of the Gemini Studio. If I say, and his experience here and his interaction with the people from Tamil filmdom provided material for his work. From 1940 to 1969, the Gemini Studio of Madras was the most influential film producing organization in India. Sahitya Academy Award for winning Tamil writer Asokamitran worked for the Gemini Studio from 1952 to 1966. A full 20 years after Asokamitran renounced films, poet, editor Pritish Nandi persuaded him to record his reminiscence, and the result was a series of articles making up My Years with Boss. So his book was written in this way when Pritish Nandi or Nandi persuaded him to record his experience. Now, if we talk about the S.S. Vasan, so see here, he is S.S. Vasan. He was an Indian journalist, writer, advertiser, film producer, director, and business tycoon. He was also the founder of Tamil language magazine Anand Viketan. Founder the film production company Gemini Studio. Now, if you see Gemini Studio, this was the logo. It used to come like this. A film studio in Chennai, 1940s. S.S. Vasan bought a film distribution concern at an auction and renamed it. The name was chosen because Mr. S.S. Vasan was also involved in horse racing and owned a successful race horse named Gemini. So there was one horse race in which he owned one horse, and the name of the horse was Gemini, and that's why he named it Gemini Studio. Now, pancakes or makeups, if we see why makeup. So pancake makeup is the name for a cosmetic face powder that has been compressed into a cake and is applied as a makeup base with a damp sponge. So pancake makeup is a type of thick, heavy, oil and wax-based foundation makeup that provides a great deal of coverage. It's often only used for the theatrical performances by people. The purpose of pancake makeup is to provide a flawless and matte finish that can be seen from far away. So see here, before and after applying the makeup. So it won't be affected by the sweat, and sweat also cannot affect it. Now, Greta Garbo, the name comes about the Greta Garbo. So a Swedish American film actress during 1920s and 1930s, nominated 3 times for the Academy Award for Best Actress. Received an Academy Honorary Award in 1954 for her luminous and unforgettable screen performances. So she is Greta Garbo. Her name has also come in this. Then Vajanti Mala, Bali. So she was a film actress, Bharatnatyam dancer, was named. She is alive, and dance choreographer and parliamentarian. She was the first South Indian actress to become a Bollywood star. She was conferred with the Sangeet Natak Academy Award. So you can see a trained classical dancer. Rati Agnihotri, you must have heard her name. So she is Rati Agnihotri. Films like Ek Duje Ke Liye, Kuli Number One with Amitabh Bachchan. So she is a very popular actress. Then it is said that this Gemini studio was located in one of the building which was once upon a time an astable of Lord Clive. So जहां पे अपने घोड़े रखते हैं, so that was the place. So Robert Clive, 1725 to 1774, he remained in India and he was commander in chief of British India. Established the military and political supremacy of East India Company in Bengal. He established control over much of India and laid the foundation of the entire British Raj. A controversial figure. He has always been a controversial figure. Now, Fort St. George, the name has also come. This is the fort. It is the British fortress in India, founded in 1644 in Chennai. So, Fort St. George. The fort currently houses the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly. The city evolved around the fortress. So, it is said that this was the main place where the assembly is now located, and around this entire city has evolved. Then St. Mary's Church. This name has also been said in this in this chapter. So it is located at Fort St. George. It is the oldest Anglican church in India and the oldest British building in India. So Britishers built first time this church. The church is popularly known as the Westminster Abbey of the East. Now, see French window. This has also come a topic. So each of a pair of glazed doors in and outside walls serving as a window and door, typically opening on a garden or a balcony. So that's why they are called French window. So Julia walked out through the open French windows onto the terrace. Now, Kotha Mangalam Subbu. See, he is Kotha Mangalam Subbu. His original name S.M. Subramaniam. He was born in 1910 and died in 1974. A Tamil poet, lyricist, author, actor, and film director. Wrote the Tamil novel Thilana Mohanambal. He was awarded with Padma Shri. Subbu functioned as number 2 in the Gemini Studio. That means after S.S. Vasan, he was the number 2. Without his permission, nothing happened in Gemini Studio. He was a close associate of S.S. Vasan. Now, Thilana Mohanambal, novel written by Kothamangalam Subbu. It was serialized in Tamil magazine Anand Vikatan in 1957 to 1958. It tells the story of, though it is not needed, an entire different thing. So this is the novel. You can just see the novel Thilana Mohanambal. Now, Devdasi. In this character, Devdasi system has also been told. A Devdasi is a girl dedicated to worship and service of a deity or temple for the rest of her life. So 1988 Devdasi system was outlawed in India. So the bill was passed in parliament and Devdasi system was abolished in India. So Devdasis learned and practiced classical Indian artistic traditions like Bharatanatyam and Odissi dancing. Franklin Nathan Genial Bookman. He is a Protestant Christian evangelist who founded the Oxford Group. Now, what was the Oxford Group? Actually, there was a clash between the two types of groups. One was the if we have say moral rearmament army. So for 23 years until his death in 1961, an international moral and spiritual movement which came to be known as Moral Rearmament Army. So Moral Rearmament Army in 1938, nations were rearming for war. Oxford Group member named Harry Blomberg wrote of the need to rearm morally, that we should not fight. But Bookman liked the term and launched a campaign for moral and spiritual rearmament in East London. So Bookman was the main person who started this movement known as moral and spiritual rearmament in the East London. More than just a new name for the Oxford group, Moral Rearmament Army signaled a new commitment on the Buchanan's part to try to change the course of nations so that they do not go for the war. So, Moral Rearmament Army, a right wing group, it was a right wing group. The result of Buchanan's worldwide call for moral and spiritual rearmament urged Christians of all stripes to courageously face impending war and totalitarian ideology. Now, this was a play, Jotham Valley, Cecil Broadhurst. So, Jotham Valley is a melodrama of two quarreling brothers. So, there are two brothers who are quarreling with each other, whose hatred brings misery to all their neighbors, particularly when one brother deprives the valley of water because he legally controls the water rights. So, he will not provide the water to the entire valley. So, in the end, the key of truth opens the hardened heart of the brother and he permits the water to gush forth and the brothers also make up. So this was the main story. So Frank Bookman was a lead actor in this play. Another play was The Forgotten Factor, 1940. Alan Thornhill, he has written. He deals with the human and ideological clashes during a tense strife or war. An industrial drama was one of his most successful. It was translated into 16 languages and subsequently filmed also. Then another, The Encounter. The Encounter was a literary magazine founded in 1953 by a poet called Stephen Spender and journalist Irving Kristol. So they founded this. So Stephen Spender, as you know the name now. So the magazine ceased publication in 1991. Why in 1991? Because in 1991, USSR started ceased to exist. So it was dismantled into 15 different nations. So it was a largely Anglo-American intellectual and cultural journal. Now the Encounter published in United Kingdom and it associated with the anti-Stalinist left. So those who were against the Stalin. It received covert funding from the Central Intelligence Agency. When this became known, Steve Spender resigned from this because he wanted to make it one of the means not biased one. But what happened when he saw that it is receiving aid from the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, so it just left it. The poet from England who visited Gemini Studio, it was Sir Stephen Harold Spender, 1909 to 1995. An English poet, novelist, and essayist. He concentrated on themes of social injustice and the class struggle in his work. So Stephen Spender, he attended Oxford University. He thought of the Spanish Civil War, was editor of Encounter magazine, 1953 to 1966. Spender was professor of English at University College London. Important works include 20 poems, 1930, Vienna, 1934, the Still Center, 1939, poems of dedication, 46, and the Gorgeous Days, 1971. Now, it is said that the last line is the God that failed. So the God that failed, 1949, it came. A book that collects together 6 essays with the testimonies of a number of co-communist writers. So all these are communist writers and journalists. The common theme of the essay is the author's disillusionment with and abandonment of communism. So earlier, here you can see Arthur Koestler, the name, then Richard Wright, Andre Ghez, Louis Fisher, and Stephen Spender, edited by Richard Crossman. So you see here the names are written of those writers who were influenced by the socialists or the communism, but later on it brought them disillusionment and they left all these things and They worshipped it like a god, but it failed, and that's why it is came to be known as the god that failed. So, if I say that we have to discuss few other things also, like this summary in a detail. So, let us come to discuss this summary in detail. So, makeup room in Gemini Studio. If we talk about the makeup room of the Gemini Studio, you will come to know that the makeup department of the Gemini Studio was in the upstairs of a building. It was believed to have been the stable of Robert Clive. It had the look of a hair cutting saloon. It looked like a hair cutting saloon. So there were incandescent lights at all angles, around half a dozen large mirrors also. So imagine the trauma that there are mirrors, half a dozen mirrors all around, and light is just have been put halogen lights, and with these lights, uh, energy, or you can say temperature, is increasing for that saloon. So those who were subjected to makeup faced a lot of misery due to heat and lights. It was headed by Bengali. Now, sometimes this question is asked how the makeup room of Gemini Studio was a mini India. So let us try to understand how it was a mini India. So first of all, uh, it was headed by a Bengali. He was succeeded by a Maharashtrian. Then he was assisted by men from Dharwad, Andhra, Burma, and usual local Tamil. So that means from every part of India, people were here. So there was a great deal of national integration in the studio. So the line has also been used here. See, there was a great deal of national integration. So these makeup men could turn any decent looking person into an ugly looking crimson colored monster. So you must be just realize the black and white pictures, and then when we used to see the people how they used to look. So truckloads of pancakes and other locally made product potions and lotions were used in the makeup. Now, if we talk about the hierarchy in the makeup department, so how the hierarchy was there in this makeup department? Those were the days of mainly indoor shooting. So all the shooting used to happen in indoor, inside the theater or studios. So a strict hierarchy was maintained in the makeup department. The chief makeup man made the chief actors and actresses ugly. His and you see his the work was to make them ugly, not to look good. So his senior assistant did the makeup of the second hero and heroine. So the main chief one was the chief actor and actresses. Then his senior assistant will do for the second hero and heroine. The junior assistant was for the main comedian, and the players who played the crowd were the responsibility of the office boy. So this office boy used to do the crowd makeup. Now, the office boy and the narrator. So let's talk about what is the relation between the office boy and the narrator. So the office boy wasn't exactly a boy. Actually, when we say a boy, so boy means 13, 14, 15 years old. No, but he was quite a young man. So he was a man in his early 40s. So you can understand. He entered the studio to become a star actor or a top screenwriter or director or lyric writer. But what happens with him? So he was a bit of a poet too. In those days, the narrator worked in a cubicle. So he was seen sitting at his desk tearing newspaper day in and day out. So the main work of the narrator of this story, Asokamitran, was only to tear out the papers, newspapers. Most people thought that he did practically nothing. Yes, he's just wasting the paper, sometimes tearing from here, sometimes tearing from there. So the office boy would advise him not to waste his literary talent in that department. It was fit only for the barbers and perverts. The narrator wanted to avoid him. Narrator, whenever he talked with that office boy, Asokamitran, he was just confused and he will just try to avoid him. The narrator prayed for crowd shooting. So he always said that, oh God, इसकी crowd shooting हो जाए किसी तरीके से मैं बच जाऊं इससे. So all the time, that was the only way of escaping from that great bore. Now, Kotha Mangalam Subbu. Now, it is one of the most important character, as you know, that this was second in line. So we need to know about him, who he was, and what he did. So Kotha Mangalam Subbu was number two at Gemini Studio. The office boy did not like him. Remember, office boy was always criticizing Kotha Mangalam Subbu. And why? God knows. He considered Subbu the cause of all his woes and neglect. That whatever the problem he has in his life, it is because of Subbu. Subbu entered the studio in more uncertain and difficult times. In education also, he was not more formally educated than the office boy. So office boy was even more educated than the Kothamakalam Subbu. And that's why this was the main reason of jealousy. So, but he was a Brahmin. That is the important thing, the casteism. So he had exposure to more affluent situations and people. Subbu was always cheerful. So Subbu's personality, we have to say that he was a cheerful. His sense of loyalty made him identify himself with his boss. He used all his energy and creativity for the advantage of his boss. He was a tailor made for films. That means uske blood and bone mein movies thi. His aim was to satisfy the producer. If he was not satisfied, Subbu would come out with 14 more alternatives. Filmmaking with 14 more alternatives. Filmmaking was so easy with a man like Subbu around. It was Subbu who gave a new direction and definition to Gemini Studio during its golden years. So that means Subbu played a major role. Subbu was a poet. He chose to write for masses. His success in films overshadowed his literary achievements. That means he was so successful in movies that his literary achievements were just put behind. He wrote truly original story poems in folk song styles. He also wrote a huge novel with dozens of characters. Subbu was an amazing actor, and actor was also. So that means he was a multi-talented man. He played secondary roles but performed better than the main players. That means हीरो और हीरोइन से ज्यादा अच्छे डायलॉग तो ये डिलीवर करता था. Okay, so Subbu had genuine love for everyone and used to feed and support many people. So anyone who came for the help, he used to help them. He was always with the boss and sometimes resembles a sycophant. So, but even such a kind-hearted man had enemies. That is the most important thing. That even this person had enemies like office boy who did not like him. So he was the office boy of the makeup department. He wished only terrible things for Subbu. So he never had good things for Subbu. Now, a lawyer in the story department. So I just told that there was also a lawyer in the story department. So Subbu was always with the boss, but he was grouped under the story department. So there was a story department and Subbu used to be with the story department. So it comprised a lawyer and a group of writers and poets. The lawyer was also known officially as the legal advisor, but nobody was impressed with him. Once, what happened? He was very sharp-minded person and very calm. So once a talented but moody actress burst out on the set. So it was in the early years of her career, that lady. And what happened? Everyone stood still. She was just crying and shouting. The lawyer quietly switched on recording equipment. When the actress relaxed for after some time, the lawyer played back the recording, and he just started that recording in which she was just how she was howling. There was nothing objectionable and foul in the recording against the producer. Nothing was said. But when the sound equipment was switched on, she was struck dumb. So was everyone present there. That was the end of a brief and brilliant acting career. So unknowingly or unwittingly, The lawyer ended the career of a young lady. Everyone in the department wore a khadi uniform. So they were impressed with Gandhi. So, but the legal advisor wore pant and a tie and sometimes a coat. He looked alone and helpless. Means you can understand when you see people around you and they are in means you can say kurta, pajama, dhoti, and suddenly you are wearing coat. That becomes a really difficult situation. So he was a man of cold logic in a crowd of dreamers. Yes, that is the important thing. It has been asked. This question is asked. So he was a logical person, and that too a cold logic. And if we talk about the movie or film industry, it is always about the dreamers who can dream about their life. So he also once made a flop film. The boss closed down the story department, so the lawyer lost his job. Now, Gemini Studio, favorite hunt of poets. So Gemini Studio wanted poets. So let's see. Gemini Studio was the favorite haunt of the poets. SDS, Yogiyar, Sangu Subramaniam, Krishna Sastri, and Harindranath Chattopadhyay visited it quite often. So most of the poets used to come here. The studio mess supplied good coffee most of the day. The studio radiated laser, the first requirement for the poetry. Most of them wore khadi and worshipped Gandhiji. The men at the studios had natural dislike for communism. They did never liked communist people. They suffered from deep-rooted prejudices against it. They considered that communists were godless people. They had no love for their children and wives. They were only ready to spread unrest and violence. So that means in Gemini Studio, everyone hated communist people. Now, moral rearmament army and counter communism. So, against communism, there was a moral rearmament army. So, the people at the studio entertained strongly anti communist views. It was natural that they were host to the MRA, Moral Rearmament Army, which was against the communism, and that's why it was asked to come and perform at Gemini Studio. So Frank Bookman, Moral Rearmament Army, visited Madras in 1952. They couldn't find a better host in India than Gemini Studio. It was a group of 200 strong people. Some called the group an international circus. They were not very good at acrobating skills. Their knowledge about animal was limited, but they presented two plays. And what were those plays presented by MRA? Jotham Valley and Forgotten Factor. I have already discussed about these two plays earlier. So in most professional manner, their sets and costumes were first rate and were copied for years by Gemini Studio. Now, a poet from England. Now we are talking about Stephen Splendor. So there was a news that an English poet was visiting Gemini Studio, but the rumor was that he was not a poet but an editor. So Mr. Watson, the boss of Gemini Studio, was also the editor of a popular Tamil weekly. So at last, at 4 in the afternoon, the poet arrived. He was a tall man, very English. The boss read a long speech, though nobody could understand what means he said. He didn't seem to know much about the English poet. The poet spoke in such an accent, and when it came about the Stephen Splendor to stand and say anything, so his accent was so much that nobody could understand what he was saying. So everyone was baffled, and the English poet was baffled most. His visit remained a mystery to everyone. That means nobody knows why he came actually. What was the purpose of his coming? Nobody knows. So Stephen Splendor and the god that failed. So after everything was over and means the writer Asokamitran just got from this Gemini Studio after 20 years or a few years later, he find a short story contest was organized by a British periodical magazine named The Encounter. So the people at the studio had not heard of The Encounter. किसी को नहीं पता था what is encounter. So the author went to the British Council Library to know more about the periodical. He also wanted to take part in the contest. So when he saw the editor's name, और जैसे ही उन्होंने एनकाउंटर में एडिटर का नेम देखा, a bell started ringing in his heart. The editor was Stephen Spender. He was the same person or English poet who had visited Gemini Studio. Then, years later, the narrator was no more in the service of Gemini Studio. He had much time but not much money. He generally bought books at a reduced prices. He paid 50 paise and picked up a copy of the book The God That Failed. It had 6 essays written by 6 famous writers. I have shown you this book. All of them were once the followers of communism, and all of them liked communism, but it was the God that failed. That means finally they were disillusioned with this. But all of them gave up communism when they got disillusioned with it. So one of those 6 writers was Stephen Spender. Now everything was clear to the narrator. The boss of the Gemini Studio may not have much to do with Spender's poetry, but he had definitely nothing to do with the communism, his God that failed. So that means the boss of the Gemini Studio, S.S. Watson, never wanted, and he never knew that what he was coming for. And that's why in this way, he had nothing to do with the communism because everyone was against communism here. So in this way, we come to end to this chapter. Thank you so much. I'll say just subscribe to this channel and we will see more of such things. Thank you so much. God bless you.